Fear is a necessary part of the human condition, but sometimes we allow fear to completely take over our lives, and it becomes extremely difficult to be able to be functional and navigate and achieve certain goals in our lives if we just allow the fear to set in. And so, with this video, I would like to address some of the mechanisms underlying fear and what we can do about them in order to allow us to live a more fulfilling life. And so, one of the things about fear is that normally we equate fear with a certain degree of uncertainty, so the not knowing. But really, what happens most of the time is that we are not really afraid of not knowing. We are afraid of a false certainty that we are creating to substitute the uncertainty. And so, the first step here is to understand what is this substitution that is actually going on. What artificial certainty am I currently building up? Because by creating this artificial certainty, we are giving a lot of value to a situation which scares us tremendously. This is completely different than, for example, if you have an outcome, for example, you have a health diagnosis in which you were given some very solid probability that it will go wrong. For example, you have a terminal cancer diagnosis. In that case, the probabilities, you sort of know what they are. And in that case, it's not really a matter of you being substituting your fear with something else. In that case, it's just really the fear. It could be also the fear of the unknown, the fear of death, the fear of suffering. But in that case, it is always a tremendously hard thing to deal with, but it is necessary to build up some degree of acceptance to any fear that we may develop, because the thing about fear is that we are continuously constructing probabilities for a wide array of scenarios. And so depending on how much probability we are attributing to a certain outcome, that probability will prune the amount of fear that we have towards that certain situation. And so this is why a lot of times you hear people saying that a certain situation in their lives makes them afraid some days, and it makes them not really afraid other days. And so here the circumstance, the situation itself, the object of fear didn't really change, although fear itself has been fluctuating alongside a spectrum. And so what is actually going on here is that the probabilities that we are attributing to a certain outcome actually happening are shifting because we are constantly receiving new information. For example, if we are feeling anxious, stressed out, that mere existence of stress will be enough to make us have a more negative and a more sensitive outlook towards all of these scenarios. So even situations that normally don't scare you, if you already have a lot of anxiety and tension in your body, it is very likely that that's going to create a positive feedback loop in which you are sort of taking in these somatic markers and your body is already in a state of fight or flight, and that fight or flight is going to attach itself to situations that normally don't scare you. So there's also that part which is very important, which is to realize what is the emotional context that you are actually experiencing in a given moment. Because a lot of times you don't really need to change the way you're thinking, you don't really need to problem solve your way out of a problem. Many times it's a matter of just sort of balancing the emotions that are within you, trying to go to a more neutral emotional background. So I believe that to be very important. And so my 3 tips are essentially, so the first one is understanding what are we substituting the uncertainty by? So what is the false certainty that we are creating in response to the fear of the unknown? The second thing is realizing that fear comes from many times from us shifting the probability that we are attaching to a certain situation happening. And so we can question, why are we attributing the probability that we are? It is also important to understand that given how variable and how these probabilities that we are attributing to the situations that scare us are constantly shifting, that doesn't provide us with a lot of stable ground. So this is where a Stoic technique of negative visualization, where you really make yourself be in the situation that you truly fear. So you are 100% in that situation. You know for 100% that the thing that is terrible and that truly scares you is actually going to happen. You do not leave any space for doubt. You truly inhabit that space for a few moments. That is extremely important, because it is only when you are fully able to embrace that which scares you that you are able to sort of limit that fear from controlling you. Because if you just focus on that probabilities game, yeah, you can rationalize yourself out of a certain fear for a moment, but then your brain is just going to collect new information. The probabilities and threat assessments are impacted by variables that are completely out of our control. We can talk about physiological variables, our hormonal levels. All of that is going to shift the way we perceive a certain threat. And so in order for us to find a more stable ground, we need to attack our fears in a way that is by fully embracing that that fear is actually going to happen, and you inhabit that space for a small period of time in a intentional way. And it's sort of like getting a vaccine. It's a mental vaccine. You are allowing a little bit of that fear coming in, and so then your mental immune system is able to take care of that. And so I believe that being aware of those two aspects is very important. Then the third, of course, is realizing what is your emotional context when you're in the process of fear thinking. Because if you're already stressed out and anxious, you're probably going to make rationalizations, and your thinking is going to be very fear-based. So you're just going to be extrapolating and creating scenarios that will just perpetuate that cycle of fear. And so our components here are essentially a component of mindfulness, which comes from, being able to scan your emotional context. We have a component of exposure, which is you fully embracing the idea that the thing that is going to truly scare you is actually going to happen. And then we have the cognitive component, which is actually questioning these statistical mechanisms that are creating all of these threat value attributes. So by focusing on those three elements, I believe that it becomes easier to turn our fears into more functional aspects of our human existence. So hopefully you found this video useful, and let me know in the comments if you want me to discuss any theme. So thank you very much.